Everybody works for somebody. For that, I'll pay you a fair day's wage.
You know, you could wind up with 2 black eyes.
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. In women's name, the wage gap myth has been used to promote law and policy intended to increase government control over pay given to employees by private employers. Feminists promote the myth using slogans like equal pay for equal work, but what happens when you get into a discussion with one of them about what constitutes equal work? They don't want to acknowledge the very real differences in aptitude, physical strength and endurance, choice of profession, in performance of heavy labor, job duties that are dirty, dismal, difficult, or dangerous, in working an odd or undesirable schedule, or in choosing high-value jobs that take years of study to learn how to do. They can't acknowledge those sex differences, you see, because if they exist, there may be instances where women don't just fail to do equal work, but actually can't do equal work, and that would ruin the narrative. Why? Because most of the time, the people who earn higher wages because of these differences are men, and research shows that when factoring them into the comparison, the gap nearly all disappears. Poof! There goes the victimhood and the political leverage feminists had banked on it to provide for them. It's certainly not going to be easy arguing for more government regulation to protect women from rampant wage discrimination that isn't happening. Who wants to listen when the issue is obviously just an attack on merit pay? The argument you'll get back is that the sex differences under discussion are not real. Gender, we're told by feminists, is a social construct. Women are not smaller and weaker than men, and it's sexist to say otherwise. Women are fully capable of doing any task as part of any job that a man can do. Any differences in work choices are a result of social expectations placed on women, rather than anything natural, and you're sexist if you disagree. One big problem? The wage gap myth feminists forgot to tell the intimate partner and sexual violence epidemic myth feminists about the whole no difference thing. These advocates push their preferred law and policy by gendering the subjects of perpetrator accountability and victims' rights. Rather than simply discussing patterns of violence, they discuss male violence and violence against women. They cite statistics on female-reported violence and statistics on male perpetration, but completely ignore female perpetration, particularly when it's against male victims. They promote narratives that generally demonize the entire male population, with campaigns designed to imply that unless taught otherwise, all men and boys will eventually rape and beat the women in their lives. They portray women and girls as innocent and helpless victims who all need government intervention throughout society to protect against those horrible, predatory, violent men. On that basis, they lobby for law and policy that would exclude men and boys from victim services and exempt women and girls from equal accountability for criminal perpetration. As we've discussed previously, about 2/3 of family violence, whether we're talking about partner violence or child abuse, is female-initiated. According to the most widely available research, about 40% of rape in the United States outside of the prison system is done to male victims, mostly by female perpetrators. In other words, the issue is not gendered as feminists describe it, with almost entirely male perpetration against almost entirely female victims, but closer to equal. And it would be wise for any public policy intended to reduce these types of violence to take both sexes' behavioral patterns into consideration. Tell that to feminists and you'll find yourself the target of a series of accusations and hedging. Rather than acknowledge that reducing women's initiation of family violence would reduce all of the violence that results from it, they accuse men's advocates of wanting to legalize beating women. They argue that it's not sexist to exclude male victims from the dialogue and exempt female perpetrators from the stigma they put on men because these types of violence are worse when men do them. Why? Well, of course, it's because of those sex differences, the existence of which the wage gap proponents deny. In fact, those differences will even be argued to override external equalizers. Feminists will tell you men are bigger and stronger, you see, so it's more dangerous and more harmful when they are violent, no matter what. Pay no attention to overlaps in the size spectrum, the effects of age, potential use of weapons, or sustained attacks that eventually pass a guy's threshold for maintaining his self-control. Sex differences are a formula for negating the impact of any and all female violence against any and all male targets. Therefore, if you discuss partner violence as a genderless issue, It's not because you are interested in the details that have to be addressed if one wants to reduce this incidence. It's because you support beating women. They'll say rape is worse when men do it because female victims might get pregnant and have to make a choice on what to do about that. True, male victims of female perps are at risk of their child being born into the custody of their rapist. The victim, even if he is underage, can be forced to pay his rapist child support for about 20 years. Feminists will simply deny that 20 years of enslavement could possibly compare to the horror of pregnancy, and therefore, resources and recourse for victims of sex crimes should be reserved mainly for women. And female perpetrators really shouldn't be considered that big of a deal because, hello, sex differences. You know, those same sex differences that don't exist when discussing education issues, but do when discussing custody, but don't when discussing sports, but do when discussing suicide. Whichever spin feminists need is how the concept of differences or lack of differences between the sexes gets applied to the discussion, depending on the issue that is under consideration. You think maybe they're just making it all up as they go along? Tune in to HBR Talk as we discuss feminism's dueling narratives on equality and their effects on the overall human rights dialogue. How does this affect feminism's responses to men's rights advocacy? HBR Talk streams on multiple platforms. You can tune in Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern via the link in the low bar, or find other viewing and listening options for that time or later on badgerfeed.com.